elavia is the Greek word, and so they did everything they could to show reverence toward God because they loved God so much. And they gave God their lives and everything that they did. We have this situation in the 8th century, of course, where this evil heresy of iconoclasm rises up. First under Leo the Osarian, who was a great emperor in many ways. He had great military battles, much as Heraclius, one of his predecessors, had had. But his dealings with the church were not so good. He actually turned, of course, away from the holy icons and banned them in the churches. He was known popularly as Sarkiphoros. He was the Saracen-minded. So he was much like the Muslims. The Muslims, he was fighting them off at this time. And he had very big inclinations toward what they were teaching about that icons were, in his mind, idols. Well, this, of course, went through many transitions. You had some emperors that were moderately good, but still bowing down to the bad press in their ears. You had Constantine Copronymus and Theophilus, ultimately, who was the last one, but of course, Leo the Armenian, over and over. You had several emperors who were enforcing this. You had many of the faithful suffer greatly during this time period. Many monks were brutally tortured, exiled, burned, defaced, you name it, martyred for the sake of the holy icons, to the point where the great Theodore the Studite, at one point with at least 1,000 monks, marches through the streets of Constantinople with icons. A pretty bold move, but that was very much like Theodore if you read his life. He did never, ever kowtow to any emperor, and he did what was right no matter what, as we must with our spiritual lives as well. This went on and on, of course, until the Empress Theodora took it upon herself to restore the icons. Remember, we had already had, many years before, the Ecumenical Council in 787, the Second Council of Nicaea, which restored the icons, but emperors sought to overturn that, what they called the Headless Council. And so they ended up persecuting people for these things, and many of them disappeared. That's why things like the icons we have in Sinai are such an amazing thing, because they are some of the earliest extant icons we have. The rest of them were destroyed. This modern idea that icons came about like only in the 4th century is delusional. It's Edward Gibbon's teaching. It's modern Western teaching, but it's not correct. We have, of course, examples from the 1st century over and over in some of the caves and places they find underground where the Christians were worshiping. The Christians did have icons and utilized religious art even from early on. But icons are not just art. They are dogma. They are part of what we believe. They are an expression of the holy faith. And they are not an option. So that's what the Empress Theodora was able to see herself, and she raised up Methodius, the patriarch, and Methodius instantly does a procession through the streets with icons. This kind of set the world on its ear. But not only did the victory of the holy icons bring the icons back into the churches for the people, it was a proclamation of the victory of orthodoxy, the triumph of orthodoxy that we call this Sunday, in which all heresies are crushed underneath the truth, which is Christ. So we must never despair when there are delusional teachings around, because Christ will ultimately prevail every time. We may have to suffer. In the world we will have tribulation, as the Lord tells us. But we must be of good cheer, because He has overcome the world. And He will overcome every heresy. So it is very important for us never to despair, but to stick to the truth no matter what. A Greek abbot that I have frequently talked to over the years told me one time, very open with me, that he had a young man in the monastery who was pondering being a novice there. And he came, and he seemed to be able to teach everybody everything, and knew more than the monks in most situations. This happens. And he noticed eventually that the young man wasn't venerating the icons as he came into the church. This is unacceptable. He confronted him about it. He said, I don't need to do that. I know what I believe. And Father told him really clearly, this is heresy. And if you don't do that, you are a heretic. Because the icons are a proclamation of the Incarnation. We never just pass by the Incarnation and act like it doesn't mean anything. It means everything. The young man left because he, of course, knew better. But that's delusional. Clearly delusion. And people reject the icons, may reject them out of ignorance, but it is an ignorance of delusion. Because the icons are salvific, because they proclaim the incarnation of Christ. Christ has become man, therefore we can depict him. He did walk amongst us. He did give us the blessing for these things. His mother blessed the Apostle Luke to paint an icon. We have the blessings from the centuries of this, and we see the miracles continuing to this day. We've experienced in this very church the cursed root icon of the Mother of God. We've experienced the Hawaiian icon of the Mother of God, the icon of St. Anna. And the icons on these walls, in their own right, are miracle working if we but faith approach them. We must never, as a result of that, treat them with irreverence or just something that's art on the wall. Every time we enter into the church, we must enter with pious reverence. As St. Paisios spends a great deal of time in the book Spiritual Waking telling us, we must cultivate spiritual sensitivity in everything that we do, because if we are not sensitive toward things like that, we are surely not going to be sensitive with our sins, and we're falling short of the glory of God. We'll pass those off too. Now, if we spend such great time getting ready for a king to come, or a president to come, or a boss to come, we are sure about the way we dress in great detail, the way we shake his hand, the way we greet him, every word that we say, how much more should we be reverent toward the King of all? Twice, a million times more reverent than that. Because, yes, he is the God that allows us to approach him. Yes, he is the God that the Magi run to give gifts because they want to be in the presence of God. But he is also the same God who Peter falls down before and says, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." This God provokes fear and love at the same time. And we must love him with the right kind of godly fear and godly love. So we must never enter the church, never enter the church without venerating at least these three icons. Not just that one, not just passing by, maybe more, but at least these three. And not to cross ourselves like we're swatting flies, but to reverently cross ourselves and make the sign of the cross properly. To hold our hands properly as confession of the faith, not to slap ourselves with a bare hand. These things mean things, and saints died for it. Peter the Aleut had his fingers cut off for crossing himself this way. So yes, it means something to enter the church properly. It means something to light a candle properly with reverence. It means something to say our prayers attentively and from the heart, slowly if necessary, not to rush through them to check off our box and say, "I got it done, I'm a good boy, God." But to reverently enter into communion with God, not to monologue with God, but to dialogue with God. That we're having a conversation actually with him and not just speaking at him so we can get on to the next thing we want to do that to us seems to be more important at that moment. The way we dispose of holy things, like pieces of paper that might have had an icon on them, or the way we deal with oil and lamps. They should never be dripping oil on lamps, ever, ever. By the way, Theodore the Studite did 50 prostrations for a drop of oil that fell on the ground. That's how reverent he felt about something that was offered to God and devoted to God. So we must remember these things and offer ourselves reverently too. We must never just say goodbye to a priest and not get his blessing. We should run to Father Peter to get his blessing. Should run to me to get my blessing, as weird as that is. Because Christ offers his blessing through my hand. Christ uses me to bless you. So we should be running to them. I remember being in Greece that way, in any Greek monastery I've ever been to, the faithful, no matter I am, are coming up right and left to grab my hand. Same with the Russians. The first time I ever saw Greek nuns prostrating at my feet to kiss my hands was rather humbling, because I knew they were far holier than I, but they were seeking Christ's blessing through the priesthood. Same when the bishop is here. We should flee to get his blessing every time we can. I don't know why Archbishop Michael of New York does it, but every time I've gotten Archbishop Michael's blessing and I ran to him to get his blessing, he has kissed my hand. Now, is this normal? No, absolutely not. But I think Archbishop Michael has that much of a reverence for the priesthood himself, where he desires blessings himself, and that's a beautiful thing. St. Jacopo Savevia, one of the great modern saints, would do everything he could to kiss even a deacon's hand if they were in his midst. I'm not telling you need to do that. It'll blow the deacon's mind if you start doing this. But you need to treat him with the respect of the clergy. And why is this? We're cultivating the heart. We're cultivating the sensitivity of the heart. Because if we are careful about things that are holy, we'll be very careful about the rest of the things in our life as well. When we enter with reverence into the church, we might enter with reverence into the hall, into our workplace. We develop a demeanor, a phronema mindset that leads to that. As I said one day in the canon this week, that when Uzzah touched the ark out of great intention to save it from falling on the ground, he was killed instantly. Why? It wasn't his place to touch the ark. God does not always act light-handed when we act with a reverence for the things he has ordained. And venerating the icons and putting the candles and treating the oil lamps and getting priest blessings are things that God has ordained. Not Father Cyprian, not the OCA, not the Russian Orthodox Church, not any patriarch. The church, Christ's body. If we begin to treat the church with reverence, we see crumbs on the ground. We don't just leave them there. We get them up and treat them with reverence. When we see dirt on something, we clean it up and don't leave it for someone else. We see dirt on the grounds of the church, we clean it up because it's part of Christ's body. We treat it with great reverence because if we do that, it always affects the heart. And we might start treating each other a little bit better because guess what? Each and every person around us also is an image of Christ. As we see in the Kentucky of the day, he came to restore that beauty to that image that had fallen. Our image. And he gives us these icons as an example that, yes, they look otherworldly. They don't look fleshly. They're not supposed to. What is it? I believe Dionysius Sierra Opagite calls it the principle of dissimilarity. It's so strange to the world that it brings us deeper into a mystery. It makes us look even more deeply into something. The same with a parable. They don't always make direct sense to us in a secular kind of way, but they draw us much, much deeper into the mystery of God. Icons are supposed to look otherworldly. They're supposed to look at something that is sober, something that is without sin, something that is dispassionate, something that is not surely as an idol which draws us into the physical appearance and awes us with that, but draws us much deeper than to the physical appearance and draws us into the kingdom of heaven. So we must always treat these things with, as with Elder Paisio says, with pious reverence. He instructed his people, and I'm just talking about nuns, his lay people, over and over and over. Don't lay your Bible on a bed or on a chair or an icon on a chair. Put it where it belongs properly on a wall, and don't just walk by it. Venerate it. He taught people to act properly all the time with meekness and humility, to not idly talk in church, to speak properly in church, if you have to at all. To speak to your neighbor the way you should, to treat everyone on the street with pious reverence, because they too are temples of the Most High. To treat our own bodies with great reverence, and not to fill them with garbage, not to fill them up with booze and drugs and cigarettes and things that are bad for it, and constant indulging in gluttony. That is not treating the temple of God with glory. We should treat the temple of God reverently. Our temple, this temple, and everything that is God's creation, because indeed, God made all of it good, and through his incarnation, all these things bring miracles. And if you do not believe that, perhaps I hope you read this week when Subdeacon Thomas sent out the letter from Subdeacon Nectarius, who brought the icon to us. You remember him, a very pious man, told us a beautiful story, and now he was going blind. We talked about this recently, and he'd gone into nearly a diabetic coma, and he was having horrible medical problems, and one night in his room, what does he see? The Mother of God. She blesses him for his pious reverence toward that icon. It is a great, great, great asceticism to have a wonder-working icon to have to deal with. This man has given his entire life to go around the world, much as Brother Jose Munoz Cortez did when he lost his life for the original Aviral icon of the Mother of God. Gave his life for it, to protect something that was holy, much as all these saints did, much as we must do too. And the world we live in now has become so grotesquely secularized and so glorifying of carnality, not the spiritual glorification of the body. We must all the more proclaim the truth. and live a life where we cross ourselves in public, where we have icons, where we venerate them, where we keep the fast, where we're not apologetic that we're Orthodox Christians, because the world now needs this message more than ever. The world is falling around us, and if we don't provide them with an example, what will they have? Don't be ashamed of your orthodoxy, in the least. Obviously, I don't have much of a choice to wear. Well, I guess I do. I could walk around in secular clothes, but that would be absolutely to my condemnation to do that. You should walk around in normal clothes the way people do, yet with great reverence, with great piety, that when people see you, they want to know, what is that peace coming forth from that person? What is that joy? What is that light coming forth from them that I want to partake of as well? It doesn't have to be with yapping your gums all the time. It has to be with the way you live, that you're showing forth the spirit of truth. And when the spirit of peace is in you, as St. Seraphim says, thousands around you will find salvation. He didn't seek out people. St. Sergius didn't seek out people. St. Anthony didn't seek out people. Thousands sought out them, because the light of Christ shone forth through them. Pious reverence, cultivated, brothers and sisters. Amen.